Following decades of national strife, including civil conflict, narco-violence, political corruption, and the assassinations of multiple presidential candidates, the beginning of the 1990s would bring about an effort in broad political transformation. These winds of change would first emerge in early 1990, when several Colombian students would run a campaign known as Séptima Papeleta, or Seventh Ballot, advocating for a reformation of the constitution. The campaign, whilst unofficial, gained widespread traction among the general populace before soon being embraced by President Gaviria. At the end of that same year, a national election was held to select some representatives for a constitutional assembly, the group who would write the now greenlit constitution. Notably, among the candidates for the assembly was the former guerrilla group M19, who'd now legalised into formal politics. Even more interesting, however, were the election results. When the polls were over, it was announced that M19 had won more votes than any other party. Following this news, the former insurgency would decide to join in a coalition with another party known as the National Salvation Movement, a right-wing group known for a strong anti-communist stance. Though certainly unexpected, the coalition, however, was less to do with ideological alignment and more to do with a shared stance on certain pragmatic issues. For instance, both groups opposed the traditional dominance of the larger liberal and conservative parties that came about through the National Front. Ultimately, this coalition would help steer the constitution in a major new direction. Namely, the assembly would end up going far beyond the originally planned revision, instead opting to rewrite the constitution entirely. Consisting of 380 articles, this new constitution would go to great lengths in strengthening democracy and political decentralization, reorganizing judicial systems, along with recognizing many fundamental human, economic, and social rights. Regarding decentralization, some key reforms included the establishment of specific elections for local government, such as mayors and governors, along with an explicit constitutional right for people to form new political parties, something which technically wasn't outlawed before but also wasn't explicitly permitted, leading to the imposition of many restrictions. In terms of social rights, the Constitution officially declared Colombia a social rule of law state, emphasizing the importance of a legal framework based on freedom and equality that everyone, including the government, was subject to, while also requiring the state to reach beyond the law to ensure the well-being of its citizens and promote social justice wherever needed. A couple of notable initiatives here included granting Afro-Colombians their own national electoral district, along with giving varying levels of self-determination to indigenous groups, allowing for self-governance according to their own indigenous customs and traditions, along with land rights. Meanwhile, besides defining healthcare, education, and social security as fundamental rights, the Constitution also introduced the Tutela system, a legal mechanism that would allow for the protection of these rights. Under this system, citizens could file a complaint if they believe their rights had been breached, which would then be reviewed by a judge who could issue orders to offenders. This system would go on to be one of the most popular legal tools in the country, with up to hundreds of thousands of cases filed each year. For marginalised communities in particular, having a system in place to demand state action in key areas such as healthcare access and environmental protection would be a major breakthrough. In the instances of certain high case offences, cases could also be reviewed by an independent judicial system, the newly created Constitutional Court, established to oversee constitutional issues. Beyond the justice system, the new constitution would also significantly transform the nation's economic infrastructure. Perhaps most notably, Colombia's central bank would now have control over inflation and be able to regulate monetary policy. This newfound independence was an important factor in ensuring stable economic growth for the country in the following decades. As a social rule of law state, there was also greater emphasis now on balancing free market principles with social justice, leading to market regulation that would protect consumers, workers, and the environment. Another important amendment, meanwhile, included the formal separation of church and state, for the first time since 1876. In practice, however, the Catholic Church would continue to maintain certain unofficial privileges, such as its prominence on the education curriculum of schools throughout the country, and even some official recognition, such as the public observation of Catholic holidays. Overall, whilst the 1991 Constitution was largely received positively, it wasn't entirely without controversy. Some felt, for instance, that it didn't go far enough to fully separate church and state in practice, despite the official separation on paper. At the time, some also worried that the rights for self-governance granted to indigenous groups would weaken national unity and cause legal loopholes. Perhaps the most controversial provision, however, was the blanket ban on extradition, as mentioned earlier. In 1991, Pablo Escobar was still at large, and many believe that this ban was a direct concession to his demands. Thankfully, the ban would eventually be overturned in 1997, although many would argue that it should have been sooner, considering Escobar had died a whole 4 years prior. Ultimately, the constitution would also often be undermined by weak state institutions, particularly in rural areas caught in the crossfire of criminal violence and power. Still, shortcomings aside, this political charter would go down as one of the most ambitious and positive democratic reforms in the history of Latin America.